Welcome to the channel where powerful stories come to life. Get ready for truth, emotion, and transformation, one story at a time. Some people believe that talent has a zip code, that genius wears heels, and that respect depends on appearances. But what if I told you that sometimes, the ones who seem invisible are the ones carrying the most extraordinary stories? Picture a humble woman, ignored by arrogant teachers, being forced to play a difficult piano piece, just to be ridiculed, until her fingers revealed a truth no one expected. That scene actually happened, and it wasn't just a music lesson. It was a lesson in awareness. In just a few minutes, that woman turned the game around without raising her voice. She played a sonata that dismantled prejudice, humiliated the so-called masters, and reignited a conversation many avoid. Why do we still judge people by the surface? You'll see how one single performance went viral, impacted institutions, and changed the future of an entire conservatory. And the most impressive part? That woman wasn't looking for fame. She just wanted to accompany her daughter. But she walked out as a symbol of a quiet revolution, one of those stories that become milestones. So stick with me until the end, because this journey will make you rethink everything about judgment, talent, and the silent power of those who observe and respond through art. Clara entered through the side door of the conservatory, holding her daughter's hand with a shy smile on her face. No high heels, no pearl necklace, just a worn coat, the kind that had lived many stories. That alone was enough to turn heads, not with warmth, but with the kind of silent judgment that screams on the inside. One of the teachers mistook her for the cleaning lady, and before she could say a word, they had already decided who she was. Life, right there, felt like a stage where she had no right to perform. "Want to try playing something, ma'am?" one of them asked with a tone dripping in irony and superiority. The others chuckled softly, as if watching an inside joke. Little did they know they were about to become side characters in one of those stories that teaches a lesson. Clara smiled gently. Even without knowing why, she accepted the offer and walked to the piano. There was something in her eyes. Not anger, not nervousness, but the peace of someone who had already weathered storms. The truth is, a lot of people go through this every day. Maybe not in a conservatory, but in job interviews, condo meetings, or bank queues. Have you noticed? People look, measure, label, all before the first note. And in that rush to judge, they overlook incredible potential. If you've been treated that way, you know how much it hurts. But you also know how powerful it is when you choose to respond with skill, not shouting. That's exactly what Clara did, opening the door to something no one saw coming. While the teachers crossed their arms with smug expressions, no one realized who was really standing before them. Clara, the soft-spoken woman with a simple look, had once played in the grand halls of Europe. She studied in Vienna, moved audiences in Paris, and received glowing reviews in Berlin. But she had left the spotlight behind to raise her daughter alone, far from pressure and fame. Her silence wasn't emptiness. It was choice. It was story. It's easy to judge those who remain silent, harder to understand why they choose silence. And that's where many stories get lost, in the details no one asks about, in the pain no one sees. Clara didn't need to prove anything. She had already lived what those conservatory professors still taught from books. But she chose a quieter life, putting her daughter first without needing applause to justify her worth. And that, my friend, is a rare kind of greatness. How many brilliant people do you know who fly under the radar? Maybe it's that lady who sews at the end of your street, the doorman who hums quietly at night, or the grandfather who never told you he speaks 3 languages. Extraordinary stories don't always sparkle at first glance. Many are tucked away between the lines of everyday life. And Clara, that day, was about to pull her story out of the drawer, just to remind us that true talent doesn't need a flashy resume. The piano sat there still, as if it too doubted the scene. But Clara stepped forward with grace, adjusted her skirt gently, and sat down like she was greeting an old friend. The teachers exchanged skeptical looks, while the students fiddled with their phones. Then came the first chords, and time seemed to stop. Rachmaninoff filled the room, not just with technique, but with soul, and that no diploma can teach. Clara's fingers didn't just play notes, they told stories. Every pause, every nuance reflected a life devoted to music. This wasn't just performance. It was a silent declaration that prejudice cannot mute talent. The melody built power, and even the most skeptical began to sit up straighter, drawn in by something they couldn't explain. And that's how it always is. When truth shows up, it doesn't have to raise its voice. In that moment, there was no more the simple woman or the accompanying mother. There was an artist, whole, radiant, reclaiming the light of someone who never lost her gift, only chose to keep it safe. And when the music finally stopped, the silence in the room was louder than any applause. Because sometimes the real impact comes in a jolt, in the breaking of certainty, in the kind of surprise that becomes a lesson, and they hadn't even seen what was coming next. The room froze. The same faces that laughed minutes earlier now looked like statues. Wide eyes, dropped jaws, trembling hands gripping useless clipboards. The program director, a man known for his firm tone and inflated ego, couldn't form a full sentence. He swallowed hard and walked toward Clara with short, hesitant steps, like someone approaching a legend he had foolishly dismissed. His apology came out in a whisper, drenched in embarrassment. Funny how ego crumbles when the truth shows up strong. Those who thought they ruled knowledge were suddenly the audience to one of the most powerful stories they'd ever witnessed. Because this wasn't just about music. It was about empathy, about truly seeing people. What collapsed wasn't just a snap judgment. It was the entire hierarchy built on appearance. Clara didn't demand respect. She commanded it with grace. And if you stop to think, this applies to everyone. How many times have you seen someone proven wrong by their own arrogance? The boss who belittles the intern, the manager who ignores the delivery guy, the speaker who dismisses the cleaning lady. The stories that teach the most are the ones that show us. In the end, labels fall away. And in that conservatory, there were no longer teachers, only students, in silence. As Clara stood up from the bench with the serenity of someone with nothing left to prove, one student, maybe the only one who truly understood the greatness of that moment, had already recorded it all. Just a few taps, an honest caption, and a post. She humbled arrogance with art. Within an hour, the video was going viral, and there began another one of those great stories the internet loves, the kind of truth no one could hide. The video was subtitled in multiple languages. People around the world began to comment. Teachers, musicians, single moms, students, everyday people who had once been judged by their appearance. It was as if Clara had given voice to all the invisible ones. With each like, each share, the message got louder. Talent doesn't wear a uniform. And when talent meets a camera, my friend, it becomes a manifesto. Now cornered by the backlash, the conservatory had no choice but to act. But the true power of Clara's story was in how she responded. Because true strength isn't about revenge. It's about turning pain into opportunity. And when the school administration knocked on her door with a formal invitation, she saw a chance to open a new score, not just for herself, but for many others. The invitation came with flowers, a formal letter, and an awkward meeting. The conservatory, now seeking redemption, wanted Clara to lead a workshop on technique, sensitivity, and musical expression. But Clara, with the grace only the greatest souls possess, didn't accept right away. First, she made a simple yet powerful request. The course had to open its doors to low-income young talents. Applause after the fact wasn't enough. It was time to act before. This decision became one of those stories that don't just make headlines, they change structures. It led to the creation of a scholarship program with open and accessible auditions. It also required that the professors undergo empathy training, because technique without sensitivity is like sheet music without sound. Pressured by public opinion and inspired by Clara's quiet strength, the conservatory agreed. And the woman who had arrived, dismissed and underestimated, now became the symbol of a silent revolution. How often do we see institutions trying to save face without truly changing? But Clara wasn't after medals. She wanted transformation. She knew her story had value, but she also understood it could serve as a bridge for so many others still without a voice. And with that mindset, she walked once again into the same auditorium where she had been humiliated, this time not as a target, but as a mentor. In her inaugural class, Clara didn't begin with chords. She began with silence. Then came a single sentence that hushed the entire hall. Before you play a note, learn to listen to a soul. That moment was no longer a piano lesson. It was a lesson in humanity, in seeing beyond the obvious, in remembering that the greatest stories don't come from applause, but from the silent paths walked with grace. Students were moved. Professors lowered their heads. That day, the teaching went deeper than any European method ever could. Her speech spread quickly. Conservatories across the country began to revise their selection criteria. Universities sent invitations. Cultural institutions sought partnerships. Clara became a reference not for her technique but for her impact, and that in itself was already powerful. But what she truly hoped was that the movement wouldn't stop with her. She wanted the door opened by her story to remain wide open for those who came after. And you know what this teaches us? That talent without opportunity is like a piano without keys. It's not enough to discover hidden brilliance. You have to create spaces where brilliance can flourish without constantly having to prove it exists. And the most beautiful thing? That very day, something blossomed. A new generation began to see the world not just as an audience, but as an open stage. A stage ready for someone very special. With teary eyes and steady hands, Clara's daughter walked to the piano as if carrying a legacy in her arms. This wasn't just audition nerves, it was responsibility, pride, and a deep love for music. She played with technique, yes, but above all, with truth. Every note reflected what she had lived at home, between quiet smiles and silent battles. And by the end of her performance, the hall erupted in applause that couldn't fit in the room. In that instant, everyone knew they were witnessing the birth of another great story. The young girl didn't bend to the weight of the moment. She played like someone having a conversation with the universe. Emotion poured through the keys, reaching even those who had never understood music. The judges, once stiff and distant, now stood in ovation. The conservatory coordinator, the same woman who weeks before mistook Clara for a janitor, searched for words to explain what she was feeling. But the music had already said it all. And more. It said that talent does not ask permission. It asserts itself. When the girl was accepted with honors, she made sure to say, "Everything I know I learned by listening to my mother." It was the kind of sentence that knocks every diploma off the wall, because there's no education more powerful than growing up beside a living example of courage, talent, and humility. The very teachers who had once doubted now saw the kind of legacy that can't be bought, the legacy of example. And Clara, sitting at the back of the room, smiled with her heart bursting with emotion. It wasn't pride. It was gratitude for seeing bloom what she once had to bury in order to survive. In that cold, formal room, surrounded by certificates, trophies, and old portraits, something took root that couldn't be framed. Respect. Respect for a woman who, even without sheet music, composed an entire life of affection, sacrifice, and dedication. Stories, like Clara's, often go unnoticed, but now and then fate places them center stage, not to be pitied, but to be recognized as the invisible masters of generations. Do you know that feeling of watching a cycle come full circle? That's what happened, but with one key difference. This cycle didn't end with applause. It ended with continuity. Clara's daughter wasn't there just to honor her mother. She was there to transform the future. And that only happens when someone dares to challenge the system. Because the most beautiful stories are those that don't end in a name, but begin a lineage of purpose. The last note hadn't yet been played, and maybe it never will, because some music keeps echoing even when the piano goes silent. Clara didn't need to step back on stage, explain herself, or carry trophies. She triumphed in silence, in the sensitive education she gave her daughter, in the values she planted, in the nights she traded sleep for care, in the love expressed through every gesture. And all of that bloomed right before the eyes of an audience that, not long ago, saw her as invisible. It was a role reversal of the highest order, one only the greatest stories know how to write. The one who taught in silence was finally heard loud and clear. The director, now moved, approached Clara and apologized, not just for that day of mistaken identity, but for all the silent judgments made throughout Clara's life. It was a simple but honest apology. Clara held her hands tightly and replied, "I hold no grudges. But I hope you remember this every time you judge someone by their shoes or their clothes." It was as if another invisible key had been pressed, not on the piano, but in the collective conscience. In the days that followed, that audition became the talk of the town, and far beyond. Social media buzzed with comments about the young piano prodigy and, most of all, about her mother. Interviews, recital invitations, tributes. But what moved Clara the most was her daughter's gaze, a look that said, "You gave me everything." And so another story was sealed, one the world desperately needs. Stories that don't come from above, but rise, slowly, like roots finally finding space to bloom. The performance had been recorded by a student, and the video went viral. Within days, all of Brazil knew the daughter of the invisible pianist. But no one dared use the word invisible anymore, because Clara was no longer a shadow. She was light, a quiet light but a powerful one, a light that illuminated not just her daughter's talent, but the blindness of a system that refuses to embrace what it does not understand. That simple family, who once entered through the back door, now opened paths through the front, leaving a trail of dignity wherever they went. Over time, other mothers began to be seen differently. Fathers, grandparents, uncles, and aunts who show up with plastic bags and uncertain eyes began to be welcomed with more respect. Clara's story became a symbol, and not by accident, because she didn't have to change who she was to be respected. Respect had to evolve to reach her. That's how real change happens, from the inside out, from the bottom up, one note at a time, until it becomes a melody of justice and empathy. Her daughter kept shining. She was accepted into one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. But before leaving, she made a point to return to the conservatory where it all began and play once more, on the same audition piano. At the end of her piece, she looked at the audience and said, "This sound isn't just mine. It belongs to every mother who never had the chance to play, but taught life in ways no sheet music ever could." The audience, in tears, understood the message. It was the symbolic final note of that story, but its echo would keep resonating in countless hearts, because in the end, it wasn't about fame or awards. It was about recognizing beauty where people usually don't look, about realizing that talent isn't a privilege, it's a possibility, and that every time someone like Clara is seen, understood, and valued, the world becomes a little more just. That's why these stories must be told, retold, and celebrated, because they remind us that the true spectacle of life happens backstage, where heroes don't wear capes, but carry courage, silence, and love. Clara stood up slowly, as if honoring the weight of everything she carried within her soul. Her steps were light, but the atmosphere around her pulsed with anticipation. The hall fell silent. Everyone watched that simple-looking woman, until recently seen as an accidental visitor, maybe a companion, maybe a janitor, anything but an artist. She walked to the center of the stage, took a deep breath, and then spoke with calm conviction. Music has no label. It has soul, and the soul of someone who feels is always more powerful than the degree of someone who only judges. It was as if each word pressed an invisible key in the hearts of those listening. A sacred silence took over. No one could remain indifferent. The room, once filled with suspicious glances, was now overtaken by awe and attention. No one dared to interrupt. Everyone in that space felt they were witnessing something greater than a performance. It was a story being written before their eyes. Clara didn't need to quote sheet music, renowned techniques, or medals. Her words weren't about mastery. They were about essence. She didn't speak to impress, she spoke to awaken. She spoke of the ability to feel, the importance of seeing beyond appearances, and above all, the urgency to truly listen, without prejudice, without rushing to judge. With each sentence, she broke invisible walls. Because what Clara did wasn't just play the piano or move an audience. She challenged an entire system of judgment, hierarchy, and arrogance. And she did it with a softness that disarmed even the most hardened hearts. As she spoke, many saw themselves reflected in that unexpected mirror. How many times had they overlooked talent based on simple clothes? How often had they dismissed precious voices just because they lacked titles or polished accents? Each word challenged conformity with grace. Because the truth is, many there were used to seeing only what sparkles on the surface. But Clara shone from within, and that's something no expensive diploma can teach. That afternoon became a turning point. Professors shifted in their seats, some ashamed, others visibly moved. Students who had often felt invisible now had tears in their eyes, as if suddenly their own stories had found a voice. The conservatory, once rigid in its structure and pride, witnessed a silent revolution. A black woman, soft-spoken and modestly dressed, had just dismantled centuries of elitism with a single recital, and, more than that, with a presence louder than any resume. Clara's performance had been visceral. The notes she drew from the piano seemed to come from deep within her soul, washing over the audience like an unstoppable emotional wave. But it was her message, her very presence, that lingered. Because some stories impress with technique and others heal. Clara's did both. As people left, no one talked about the event of the day. They talked about her, about what she stirred, about how every glance or rushed judgment now weighed heavily on those who had cast them. Clara had become a symbol, not just of genius but of awareness, a kind of awareness that pierces the walls of any conservatory and shouts, even in silence, to a world still obsessed with packaging over substance. The news spread fast. Soon, the video of her performance was shared thousands of times, but unlike many viral moments, this one held something transformative. Universities in other countries began discussing her case in classes about art, ethics, and empathy. Some invited her to lecture, others asked her to teach. But staying true to herself, Clara simply replied, "I didn't come to teach. I came to remind." And that's the point. While the world chases after titles, status, and validation, she reminded us that art and life live in the unseen, in the details, in the small gestures, in the genuine listening, and especially in the courage to exist without asking for permission. The conservatory's director, once proud and haughty, was among the first to rise for a standing ovation. At the end, she approached Clara with tearful eyes. She apologized, yes, but more importantly, she asked for guidance, because she realized that everything she had taught for decades had failed where Clara had triumphed, in human impact. Clara smiled, a calm, humble smile, filled with meaning. She knew the transformation wasn't about her. It was about the doors her story could open, and about all the other Claras out there, quiet, invisible, waiting for one chance to shine. And if you think it all ended there, you haven't yet realized that some lessons echo for generations. Clara returned to her life. She went back to her community, continued teaching the children at church, playing at local festivals, and listening to people's pain with the same care she gave the piano. But her presence was never the same again. Everywhere she went, someone recognized her. And the most beautiful part? It wasn't about fame. It was about the change she embodied. Clara became a reference, a symbol of a new way to teach, to lead, to feel. And today, if you look closely, you'll see many conservatories reevaluating their practices, many schools revising their culture, many professionals once arrogant now learning to truly listen. All of this because a woman, judged before the first note, decided her truth was more important than anyone's approval. She didn't just play the piano, she moved the world. And as long as someone is willing to listen, her story will continue to be told. How many stories have you ignored because they didn't shine bright enough at first glance? How many times have you looked away from someone simple, assuming there was nothing special there? The truth is, in our daily rush, we've gotten used to judging by surface, by clothing, by the way someone walks or speaks. And in doing so, we've overlooked extraordinary people, hidden talents, stories that could have changed how we see the world. Clara is one of those examples. But the scariest part is realizing how many other Claras surround us, unseen, silenced, misunderstood. The world is full of talented people being judged by worn-out shoes, non-conforming hairstyles, or soft voices that many mistake for weakness. Meanwhile, there are plenty of people with flawless resumes and empty souls making decisions, enforcing rules they've never had to live through. These contradictions feed cycles of injustice, where merit gives way to prejudice, where true brilliance is smothered by stereotypes. The stories that teach us most often arrive wrapped in uncomfortable silence, not in grand speeches. We must learn to hear what isn't being said, because sometimes talent doesn't make noise. It walks in slowly, waits respectfully, and hopes to be seen by those who truly see. Clara never demanded a stage. She never begged for respect. She simply showed, with grace and conviction, that behind a modest appearance lived a sleeping giant. And when she finally played the piano with mastery, it wasn't just a technical climax. It was the silent scream of all the stories silenced, of all the people who were underestimated and swallowed their pain in silence. This video isn't just about music. It's about choices, about the kind of person you choose to be when faced with difference. Will you keep hiding behind snap judgments, or train your eyes to see beneath the surface? Will you build more walls, or help construct bridges? Because at its core, Clara's story is a mirror, and maybe if you look closely, you'll see pieces of yourself in it. Times you were judged, or perhaps judged someone unfairly, and there's no shame in that. We've all missed out on a great story because it didn't look the way we expected. What matters is what we do next. It's about recognizing, learning, and choosing to do better. Every time you decide to listen, to include, to create space, you're helping rewrite this collective narrative. You're proving that talent, value, and dignity don't wear uniforms. They wear truth. They wear courage. They wear soul. So today's question is simple but powerful. What if the next genius you meet is disguised as someone ordinary? What if the person standing behind you in line has a story that could change your life, if only you stopped to listen? How many opportunities for connection, growth, and transformation have we missed simply because we don't listen with our hearts? How many talents remain on the margins because no one gave them a chance? There's something deeply beautiful in realizing that. Because when we admit we were wrong, when we've been blind, when we've ignored a story, we make room to grow. And growth, my friend, is what transforms the world. Not just grand revolutions or viral speeches, but small, daily decisions. To treat others with respect, to ask someone's name, to truly listen, to give the benefit of the doubt to someone no one expects anything from. If Clara's story touched you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Send it to someone who's always inspired you without ever getting the recognition they deserve, or to someone who needs to learn how to see more deeply. Write in the comments what moved you most. Share if you've ever lived something similar, if you've ever felt invisible, or discovered a hidden talent in someone no one noticed. These stories need to circulate. They're seeds, and when planted in the right heart, they bloom into actions that change everything. And of course, if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, now's the time. Because here, every video delivers more than entertainment. It delivers reflection, humanity, and transformation. While the world out there tries to teach us to value what shines on the outside, we're here to remind you that the truest gems often arrive quietly, but change everything from within, and you won't want to miss a single one of these stories.